Victory from Waterfall. Come all you gallant sportsmen and come along with me as we journey down an Irish country road. We'll watch the great bowl spin, we'll see Mick Barry win. From Cork to Armagh, we all know he's king of the bowling road.
As the bowling bishop, Dr. John Buckley, put it, bowling is part of the texture of life in Cork City and County and attracts thousands of people, both participating in and supporting the sport. It is more than a sport. It is a subculture with its own language and traditions.
Sport is part of our culture as well, you know, and it's a cultural artefact. And I think this is a big challenge for us to understand that. Some sports, I suppose, you could say, are being pulled away from their traditional cultural roots. And I suppose the most obvious one would be something like soccer or football, which, you know, had a very strong roots in, you know, working class communities in the north of England. And, you know, it's become a globalised sport and, you know, I suppose, you know, owned by huge conglomerates and so on and so forth. And then, you know, becomes a massive media thing. Whereas a sport like road bowling, which contrasts very much, is very much still rooted in the same communities and in the same places and in the same lore and traditions that it always was. I know the game is evolving, society continues to evolve, but you can see the connections in the words that bowlers use and in the place names on bowling roads. You know, you'll see very old accounts of sport, and there's two that come to me straight away. There's accounts of bowling in Waterfall, which is on the outskirts of the city, on the western side of the city, famous bowling road, synonymous with the great Mick Barry. This is where he grew up. And there's a point in the road called the Glasha, and that's still used today. People refer to that, and you can see that in reports back in the 19th century.
There was people from the city come out bowling of a Wednesday evening. There would be that time it was the half day in the business just in the city, and they'd come out bowling and they'd bowl from the mill lane. We'll say to two part, and they'd bowl up another one, and they'd bowl back, and they might bowl short scores. And there was another group of players then. They were from Harrigan's Buildings. There was at least 100 of them together. You would come of a Saturday evening. They were a big attraction in the road at that time. And then they had a tournament naming the old veterans. They were all men around 70 or more, and they was bowl from the mill lane all the way to Waterfall pub.
Wednesday was the half day. So what we used to do, we were expected to go up the Monfield in Fairhill, which belonged to the brothers, and we were expected to play hurling and Gaelic football. But there was a few of us, Larry included. What we did is, like, right, we just pretended to the brother that we were present, right, and that we were there to be picked for a team. But what we did was, like, at the first opportunity, when the brothers' back was turned, we'd skip over the wall, right, of the field, and we'd head out Fairhill, right, further out towards the Croppy Boy, and we'd have our score of bowls. So we'd play away there as long as there was light. Light was very important, of course. You couldn't play in the dark, obviously. But in the summer and the long balmy evenings, like, right, the scores could go on all day between different people, right, different factions, and so forth, like, right. And invariably, like, right, we would finish in the dusk. Sometimes to be in virtual darkness, and in order to ensure that the score would be finished, like lighted papers or some kind of form of wood would be taken and lit. Well, it's more papers than anything else, like, really, you know, and they'd light the paper right on the ground, and that would be where they would hope, like the bowl player, the thrower, would aim for that, like, because when he'd see the light, if you like, it would mean, like, right, that he was after putting the bowl in the right place, like right for the longer shot. Further on then in time, on the Wednesday afternoon, we would get our bikes and we would cycle out to Waterfall to see the bowl playing going on there, which is the road on where Mick Barry was born and bred. And I'm sure we'll come to that. But I spoke of Dublin Hill a while ago. The score started at the long lane at the top of Dublin Hill. And that time, like, right, way back, right, the scores were played out as far as the boot house, which was about 4 miles, like, road, like, you know. So it was great, like, right, that there were pubs on the way, incidentally, like, right. No harm to mention the Black Man pub, which still is there, right. Mary Ann's pub in White's Cross, right, where Mick Barry lofted the ball over the roof.
In all great sporting highlights, you'll find Cork to the fore. We've had Christy Ring from the mighty Glen, now the female jet from Cove. At the loft of the ball, we're still the best, the greatest sports of all. So let's sing in praise of our hero now, Mick Barry from Waterfall.
There's very little doubt from anybody within the sport who has any sort of idea at all of who's who and what's what in the sport, right? And Mick Barry was the man who was the one to be beaten, if you like, right? I mean, he was so good in pre-Bowl Common days, right, that he was barred from participating. And the various organising committees throughout the country decided that they would send invitations to various players to participate in the tournament in their area. And Mick Barry was not given an invitation. And if it had been known that Mick Barry had received an invitation, others would return theirs. So really that says it, that those who were senior players at the time were very, very reluctant to take on Mick Barry. And it's only when, in 1954, that Bowl Common Hearn was established, that Mick Barry could no longer be barred from the sport. Consequently, from 1954, his record, hence, if you like, was that unarguably he was the best player of the crop, and his record is there to substantiate that.
On the west side of the city stands that monument in the sky. To aloft the Chetwynd Viaduct, all great bowl players did try. From the German ramp, Hans Balken sent the bowl now sailing o'er. But from the ground who struck that rail, 'twas Mick Barry from Waterfall. What a massive crowd will gather for that great score in the sky, when we'll meet the boys from all Fairhill and the crowd beyond Fermoy. From Cantor down to Bantry Town, from Cady back to Youghal, and Peter is sure to place the sop for Mick Barry from Waterfall.
By the 1960s, women, primarily from strong bowling families, began to challenge their exclusion from the sport, and they took to the roads, organising their own scores. One of the pioneering women was Liam's sister, May O'Keefe, later Barry and mother of Susan Green, the first female chairperson of Bowl Common Hearn.
Well, when I did start bowling first, it was just after school. I was starting very young, but I had one sister, just the two of us in the family, and of course I was older than her, and I was the boss over her. I'd bring her out on the road and I'd say, I want a few throws, and you would roll back the bowl to me, which was right there now in front of my house, and I'd have 5 or 6 or 7 throws, and she'd throw it back. After trying it back for 4 or 5 months or maybe a year, she improved, but she had no interest. She thought bowling would never take effect with women, which is in a big way now. But she would throw the bowl back to me, and she was a credit to how I got good, but she had a grand swing of a bowl.
Back, I think, in the early 60s, there was a tournament run to put up a monument, actually, I think, in Dripsey, and the ladies actually bowled there, which was totally against the rules, I suppose, of the church and all of that at the time. But my mother would have been quite a strong person and enjoyed it, and actually won that tournament. Then in the early 80s, when bowling started for the ladies, she participated, won many championships, and would have been on the first international team actually in 1984 that travelled to Garding. So that was a huge achievement for her, kind of in just maybe in her late 40s, early 50s.
Many of the big names in bowling were associated with Waterfall before and since the golden era of the 30s, when it was known as the Croke Park of bowling. One could recall when gathering after Mass in Ballinora and word got around that a Red Crowley of Cloncool Terrace Bandon was coming to play a score on the Waterfall Road. It was like the Pope was coming. But every area has its heroes, and not just in counties Cork and Armagh.
Cork City still is, and always historically was, the biggest single place for road bowling. People think of it as a country sport maybe very often, but the biggest numbers of players and supporters are really in Cork City, both on the north side and the south side. And I suppose back in the heyday of Mick Barry was seen as the south sider and Dennis Scully the north sider. And Dennis Scully obviously came from Fairhill, a very famous place for bowling. I was reminded of this about a week ago or so. I did an American Visitor and I went up to Shandon, and they have, in the graveyard there beside St. Anne's, they have pictures of famous people from the neighbourhood. And I said, there's one very famous person missing off the list, and that was Timmy Delaney. Because Timmy Delaney lived in that area, and Timmy Delaney was the most famous bowler of all, I suppose. Before Mick Barry especially, everybody knew who Timmy Delaney was, and he carried the hopes and dreams of the north side of the city and the boys of Fairhill. He's mentioned in the boys of Fairhill in the song, and it seemed to me a little bit peculiar that there wasn't a picture of Timmy Delaney up there to say, yeah, famous people from here. This guy was famous. Now Jack Lynch is there, of course, and he deserves to be there as a politician and a famous hurler and a bowler as well, of course. But I think somebody missed Timmy Delaney somehow.
The Croppy Boy to my mother was always the heart of Fairhill, because the Croppy Boy was where Timmy Delaney lived and Jack O'Shea lived. One of the great occasions on a Sunday morning, crowds would gather along Mick McSweeney's wall, and they'd watch Delaney in practice, and his practice was to loft a bowl, a 28 ball of iron, into a bucket 70 yards away. That was a big occasion, and that was his training. At that time, people in Cork felt they were the only people in the world who bowled. So word came through eventually from Armagh that the great champion in Armagh at the time, Hammerman Donnelly, would challenge the king of Cork bowlers of the time, which was Timmy Delaney. So he said, I'll go to Armagh and I'll take him on. But as soon as his followers heard that, they said, hold a minute, it's 300 miles away and Jesus will be killed up there. So, but Delaney had no fear. He decided he was going to go to Armagh. Delaney headed off by train to Belfast. But during that time then, Jack O'Shea, his great coach, they got a change in mind, and they said there's no way they could leave that man above there on his own. They travelled on to Armagh by car. And they were absolutely stunned when they got to the bowling road. It was absolutely black with people, and the police was there trying to hold back the crowd. Eventually the score settled down, and in total hysteria, the Hammerman Donnelly led for the first half. But in the closing stages, Delaney, being maybe a little bit fitter on the day, God only knows, but he eventually became victorious. But then the most important thing of all, in defeat, the Armagh people were so fascinated with this individual who came all the way from Cork, and so proud he was prepared to travel that distance. They shouldered him high into Armagh City. And that great sporty exhibition, it links today, and that bond is there still in Cork. Up to this very day, you've got young boys and girls now of all ages travelling north and south 3 or 4 times a year. And, you know, it's incredible. When the Cork bowlers arrive in the beautiful rolling green glens of Cady, County Armagh, they feel their home, because they know then they're then at that stage going into the heart of Delaney, Hammerman Donnelly country.
Looking at the boys of Fairhill, you had Tim Delaney's standard of bowling in at least 8 of these men, if not more. Like, now there was Jack Hasey, and Jack Hasey was the grandfather of the famous Gould brothers. Kieran Gould, Anthony Gould, Michael Gould, they're all fantastic top-line players. Well, their grandfather was actually, he was Timmy Delaney standard.
How bowling started for me, well, my family was involved in bowling. My uncle Finbar, Casey, the grandfather bowled. But I was a small bit wild when I was young, so I was the youngest in the family, so they would normally take the responsibility of taking me on the bowling rod. So I used to be throwing stones around the place, and I broke an odd window here and there, like in the houses. And the doggy man, Johnny Allen, from Fernley, he came up and he caught me by the back of the neck. He said, "Get up here." He said, "Come with me, you." So I went up Nash's Boreen to by the side of Donny Sullivan's pub, and he put a bowl in my hand. That's the first time I caught a bowl, and I didn't look back afterwards. I have an All-Ireland senior title one. I went to 4 months to senior finals. I won 3. I lost 1. Seamus Sexton beat me in that one. I won 3 King Roads. I won the McPhair Cup up in the north. The other's Northern Champion versus Southern Champion. I won that 3 years. So, and I won a lot of major tournaments around. So
there's a huge tradition there, and I think it's kind of wound into the whole culture, especially in the north side of the city. And I suppose it has its own peculiar things there in terms of drag hunting and pigeon racing and sports, I suppose, that you don't normally associate with urban living. But there's some kind of unique, special spirit in the north side of the city that they cherish. You know, sports that are slightly quirky, maybe, or to the side, but they're important part of the heritage and culture of that part of the city.
Come on, boys, and you'll see lads and lasses full of glee. Famous for a holiday will make your heart thrill. The boys, they will not harm you. The girls, they will all charm you. Here's luck to all, says the boys of their hill. Come on, boys, and spend the day with our bowling club so gay. The lock of the ball, it will make your heart thrill. When you hear the share I say, Timmy Delaney's won the day. Here's the all, says the boys of their hill.
For we were all born then, but we'd have rivalries in bowling. But sure, after that then, you know what I mean, win, lose or draw, you were going in for an old shandy. Great tradition of bowling in the north side as well, there was, always.
There was a generation of bowlers.
It was all sportly.
Yeah. Aunts, you could say aunts, uncles, the lap players.
That's right.
They said,
like Michael's father there would have been one of the top bowlers in Ireland at the time, and we had an uncle, Mikey, wasn't he? He was very good as well. And
Mikey, their uncle was very good.
Before it was formed, come on, and then my father was there.
Their grandfathers, their fathers before them were bowlers.
Were bowlers as well. Actually, they were one of the founders of his father would have been innocent. His father
would have been in that as well.
Mikey Driscoll, Blackpool, his grandson's bowling as
well. You see, of all the sports, that was the main sport that we had. You know what I mean? Of all of them.
We have this fella come on as well.
This one, Anthony,
There's only sport we're in, really. I don't remember in any other sport, really. There was only 16 seniors at the time.
In the 70s.
70s and 80s.
In the 70s and 80s. There was 16 top seniors in Munster, and there was, I think, half of the seniors were actually from the travelling community at the time, so that stood well for us as well, you know what I mean? Well, it was for and against, because if you were drawn out of the hat, then you had to play whoever it was, you know what I mean?
So John and Jim played in the county final.
Yeah, we were the only two brothers
at the time.
Even so, like at the time, it was a knockout competition. Like there was no back door. And me and John, 1997, we got to the Munster final, the two of us. And he beat me, but sure.
He left me one.
But he went on to win the All-Ireland after anyway, and it was one of our most successful years because he won the King of the Roads.
Fernhill, wasn't it?
Fernhill. And he won the King of the Roads the same year, and I don't know, 2 or 3 more tournaments. It done no harm for any of us to go into bowl playing, even though we probably lost as much as we won. But we were very proud to be involved in the history of bowling from Cork.
The Driscoll brothers there now, John and Jim. Johnny on his way now again. His very last throw in this match. Oh, mighty bowl. Tremendous bowl. Here is Timmy jumping up in the air. Oh, mighty victory for John Driscoll. Shoulder high in the road.
I'm Greta Carmichael. I live and breathe and eat bowling. I'm married to Michael Carmichael. He's a Galway man, never saw a bowl until he met me. We have 3 daughters. They bowled when they were young just to please me, but now they don't bowl anymore. So, because every time someone had asked them, where's Mammy? She's gone to a bowling meeting. Where's Mammy? She's gone to a score. She's gone bowling related all the time. So they had enough of bowling, so they don't bowl. But they do support me in everything I do. There's no problem there. What else can I say about myself? I have 4 brothers and they all bowled, so they introduced me to bowling because I'm an only girl. I got into a competition when I was about 14. My father put me in the boys under-16 championship in the southwest region. I went to the semi-final and I got beaten that. And the fella that was in the final was peppering because it was a fella and he obviously thought he didn't want to be meeting a girl. So that was fine. I lost that. And then in 1980, Bol Cumann introduced women's bowling. First year I got beat in my own region, that was fine. Next year I got beat again, and in 1982 you could say my career took off. I won it in 82, I won it in 83, I won it in 84, and I won the All-Irelands with it, which was excellent for me and for my followers. In 1998 I won the All-Ireland at home in Lyre, because the All-Irelands were in Lyre, and I happened to get to the final, which was nice, to bowl down my own road in such a prestigious competition. And then later on that year in August, September maybe, Armagh ran World Championships. It was in conjunction with the Apple Blossom Festival. And we went up on the Friday and we were taken into this library and all these beautiful trophies were in front of us, beautiful globes of the world. And I turned to one of the girls or someone anyway and I said, I'm going home with one of them. And sure enough, I came home with the top trophy as world champion, first Irish lady road bowling world champion, which was a huge honour, you know. Back in 1984, we went on the European Championships. That was the first time they introduced the women to road bowling there. It had always been just men, senior men usually. And I happened to be on the team. And I was only 21 or whatever I was, I can't remember. And I said, you know, why not give this my best shot? And sure enough, I did. And I came out on top as the first European Championship champion. So I have a first of a good few things, you know, which is fantastic. This past year, I had 7 All-Irelands. And this past season, there's a Kelly Mellon. She's from Armagh, fantastic athlete. She plays senior football for Armagh. She surpassed my record. She now has 8. The 7 All-Irelands that I achieved them over the span of 20 years. So this girl, she's going to blow records out of the water.
It's pretty strong in our community. It's Madden, but there's weekly competitions. Mostly Sunday mornings there's still competitions running. You have loads of different grades. I think the youth structure has really started to build over the past number of years, which is very encouraging. Daddy would put a lot of he'd put a lot of backroom into that because he's the chairperson of the Bol Cumann Armagh. So he puts a lot of work into trying to build the grassroots of the sport, and there is a lot more competition coming through the Ulster section. On years past, maybe Munster would have dominated the All-Ireland series as a whole, but now with our up and coming with the Ulsters, they're definitely more competitive, and the Ulster side are starting to win a few more All-Irelands, which is great coming forward. And I have a couple of girls coming up catching at my tail as well, which is great. It's great competition for me, and it's great for the sport in general.
When you win, there's a great buzz. There's always a win. That goes for any sport. The great buzz in winning. We celebrated every county win and every All-Ireland win. There was bonfires in Lyre and a tally-ho after, and Everyone, the postmortems. We go into the bar after or whatever, and we do the postmortems as to how I won it or whatever, and and all the neighbours and friends and relations come. And I think when I won the World Championships in Armagh, I think that was when I came home that evening. There was bonfires, and they shouldered me down the road and into the pub, and the place was absolutely jointed with people. I was above in Armagh thinking, I've won this now, we'll go home and we'll get on with life. I didn't think that they were going to organise such a big welcome home for me, but it was fantastic, absolutely, times to remember.
Oh, one day as I went for a ramble, all alone by myself I did stray. Oh, and I met with a gay young deceiver while walking along the byway. Her eyes, they shone like the diamonds, and I thought her the queen of the land. Oh, and her hair was thrown over her shoulder and tied with a black velvet band. Well, next day I was hunted and captured, all alone in the dock I did stand, and I was charged with robbing and stealing, all for loving her black velvet band.